26 May 1941, 20:47 hours, flight deck of HMS Ark Royal, 690 miles west of Brest. Sub-Lieutenant Charles Friend, 23 years old, 51 operational sorties, checked the fabric covering on his Fairey Swordfish's lower wing. Rain hammered the canvas, wind gusted at 40 knots across the carrier deck. The aircraft, a biplane, open cockpit, maximum speed 138 miles per hour, looked like it belonged in a museum, not hunting the most powerful battleship afloat. Bismarck was 30 miles ahead, 41,000 tons, 8 15-inch guns, 30 knots sustained speed. She had already sunk HMS Hood 3 days earlier, 1,415 British sailors dead in 4 minutes. Now she was 18 hours from Luftwaffe air cover and the safety of Brest. If she reached port, the Royal Navy would lose control of the Atlantic convoy routes. Britain would starve. This was the day the British proved that obsolescence could be weaponized, that a fabric biplane from 1936 could cripple a steel Leviathan that modern bombers couldn't touch. The question haunting every man on Ark Royal's deck: how do you stop a battleship running at 30 knots when you're flying an aircraft slower than a Spitfire's landing speed? At 2050, 15 Swordfish began launching into a Force 6 gale. Friend's aircraft lurched off the deck, dropped toward the waves, clawed back to altitude. Visibility, 2 miles in driving rain. Sea state, 30-foot swells. Target, a moving fortress capable of shooting down anything that approached within 5 miles. Subscribe to this channel if you believe precision and obsolete courage deserve preservation, not the Hollywood version but the mathematics of fabric wings hunting armoured steel. The Fairey Swordfish should not have been in service in 1941. First flight, 1934. Construction, steel tube frame covered in Irish linen, doped and painted. Empty weight, 5,200 pounds. Powered by a single Bristol Pegasus radial engine, producing 690 horsepower. Maximum speed, 138 miles per hour in level flight. Cruise speed, 104 miles per hour. Compare this to Bismarck's specifications. The battleship could maintain 30 knots, 34 miles per hour, indefinitely. Her secondary armament included 16 4.1-inch guns specifically designed for anti-aircraft defense. Engagement range, 12,000 yards. Rate of fire, 15 rounds per minute. Each shell contained a proximity fuse that detonated within 30 feet of a target. The mathematics were brutal. A swordfish approaching from 10 miles out would be under fire for 8 minutes before reaching torpedo release range of 1,000 yards. In that time, Bismarck's guns could fire 1,920 shells. The aircraft had no armour. A single hit would shred the fabric, sever the control cables, kill the crew. Yet the Swordfish possessed 3 advantages that no modern bomber could match. First, it was too slow to be dangerous. German fire control systems calculated deflection angles for aircraft travelling at 250 miles per hour or faster. Bismarck's radar-directed guns tracked targets moving at modern combat speeds. The Swordfish flew at half that velocity. German gunners aimed where a fast aircraft would be, and the Swordfish wasn't there yet. The shells passed ahead. Second, it could operate in weather that grounded everything else. The fabric wings flexed in turbulence instead of braking. The open cockpit gave pilots direct sensory feedback. They felt wind direction, pressure changes, storm intensity through their bodies. The fixed landing gear created additional drag that made the aircraft stable in gusts that would have tumbled a monoplane. Third, it carried the Mark 12 torpedo, 18 feet long, 1,610 pounds, warhead containing 388 pounds, of Torpex explosive. Unlike bombs, which required direct hits, a torpedo detonating against a ship's hull created a gas bubble that crushed internal compartments. One hit below the waterline could flood 3 compartments. 2 hits could sink a cruiser, but delivering that torpedo required approaching within 1,000 yards of the target. At that range, Bismarck's secondary guns fired point blank. No aircraft had successfully torpedoed a German capital ship in daylight. The Royal Navy had tried with twin-engine Beauforts, 4-engine Halifaxes, modern monoplanes with twice the Swordfish's speed. All had failed. At 21:05, Friends observer, Sub-Lieutenant Peter Fane, identified a radar contact bearing 110 degrees, range 28 miles. 15 Swordfish formed up in 3 sub-flights. Flight leader Lieutenant Commander Tim Coode transmitted on voice radio. "Target identified. Bismarck. She's making 30 knots due east. We attack in sequence. Good luck." No dramatic speeches, no rousing words, just the facts and the mission. Friend pushed the throttle forward. The Pegasus engine's note rose from a rumble to a howl. Airspeed 110 knots, altitude 6,000 feet, range to target, closing. Tell me in one word what those 15 Swordfish crews possessed as they turned toward Bismarck. Was it courage, or was it something colder? To understand what Friend faced, you must first understand what Bismarck represented. She was commissioned in August 1940. Displacement 41,700 tons standard, 50,300 tons fully loaded. Length 823 feet, beam 118 feet, draft 31 feet. Her main armament consisted of 8 15-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. Each shell weighed 1,764 pounds. Muzzle velocity 2,690 feet per second. Maximum range 35,600 yards, 20 miles. She could engage enemy ships beyond visual horizon. Her belt armor measured 12.6 inches thick, angled at 20 degrees from vertical to deflect incoming shells. Her deck armor ranged from 3.1 to 4.7 inches. Her turret faces were 14.1 inches thick. She was designed to absorb punishment from battleships firing 16-inch guns at close range. A half-ton aerial bomb striking her deck would penetrate the upper armor but detonate before reaching vital spaces. The Royal Navy knew this because they had tried. On 24th May, 9 Swordfish from HMS Victorious attacked Bismarck in daylight. They launched 8 torpedoes. 1 struck amidships, portside. The explosion damaged some hull plating, killed 1 German sailor, caused minor flooding. Bismarck reduced speed briefly, then resumed 30 knots. The attack achieved nothing strategic. That same day, HMS Hood engaged Bismarck at 25,000 yards. Hood fired her 8 15-inch guns. Bismarck replied. At 6 o'clock, Bismarck's 5th salvo struck Hood's magazine. The explosion broke the ship in half. Hood sank in 3 minutes. 3 survivors from a crew of 1,418. This was the target Friend was hunting with a fabric biplane, but Bismarck had a vulnerability. Her designers had prioritized speed and firepower over damage control redundancy. She possessed a single rudder controlled by 3 steering motors in the stern compartment. If that rudder jammed, the ship could only steer using differential engine power, slowing the port or starboard screws to turn. This was inefficient at high speed. A ship turning under engine power alone described wide, uncontrolled circles. No one in the Swordfish crews knew this yet. They only knew that Bismarck had to be stopped before she reached Brest. Once within range of Luftwaffe fighter cover, she would be untouchable. The home fleet, battleships King George V and Rodney, cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, was pursuing at maximum speed. But Bismarck was faster. The gap was opening. Admiral John Tovey, commanding the home fleet from King George V, faced a brutal calculation. His battleships had fuel for 36 more hours at pursuit speed. If Bismarck maintained her current course and velocity, she would enter Luftwaffe protection range at 1400 hours on 27th May. The home fleet would have to break off at 800 hours, still 50 miles from engagement range. The only force capable of slowing Bismarck was Ark Royal's Swordfish, an aircraft type that the Fleet Air Arm had tried to retire in 1939, an aircraft that training schools called obsolete, an aircraft that flew slower than some German reconnaissance planes. At 21:35, friends saw Bismarck for the first time. She was 8 miles ahead, a grey rectangle against grey sea, barely visible through rain and spray. Her wake stretched behind her, white foam indicating 30 knots sustained. Her anti-aircraft guns were already firing, orange flashes along her superstructure, black shell bursts forming a barrier 2,000 feet above the ocean. Friend banked left, descending to 200 feet. The Swordfish dropped into the wave troughs, using the ocean's contours for cover. Spray soaked Friend's goggles. He wiped them with his gloved hand. Airspeed, 105 knots. Altitude, 150 feet. Range, 7 miles. If you value these precise, verified accounts of British operations during the Second World War, subscribe to this channel. We examine the moments that textbooks summarize in a single sentence. Now, back to the approach that would strand Germany's most powerful warship. 15 Swordfish divided into 3 groups. Cood's group, 5 aircraft, would attack from Bismarck's port quarter. Lieutenant Michael Feather Godfrey's group would strike from starboard. Friend's group, led by Lieutenant Hugh de Graaf Hunter, would approach from dead astern. The theory: saturate Bismarck's fire control, force her guns to track multiple targets from different bearings simultaneously, create confusion, reduce effective fire, increase the probability that at least one torpedo would hit. The reality: controlled chaos in a gale. Wind gusts knocked Swordfish off course. Rain reduced visibility to 1 mile. Pilots lost sight of their wingmen, reformed, lost them again. Radio communication crackled with static. Navigation depended on dead reckoning. Airspeed, compass heading, elapsed time because cloud cover obscured celestial fixes. At 21:47, Cood's group began their attack run. 5 Swordfish descended to 50 feet above the water, flying directly toward Bismarck's port beam. The battleship's secondary guns opened fire. 4-inch shells created waterspouts 60 feet high. The Swordfish flew through the spray, wings flexing, engines screaming at full power. Cood released his torpedo at 800 yards. The Mark 12 dropped free, hit the water, propellers spinning, steering vanes adjusting course. It ran straight and true, then passed 10 feet ahead of Bismarck's bow. The battleship had altered course 1 degree to port. The torpedo missed. The second Swordfish released. Miss. Bismarck turned starboard. Third Swordfish. The pilot held his approach until 600 yards, compensating for Bismarck's turn rate. Release. The torpedo struck Bismarck's belt armor amidships. The explosion created a 30-foot column of water. The battleship shuddered, then resumed course. The torpedo's warhead had detonated against the thickest section of armor. Minimal damage. 4th and 5th Swordfish attacked. 1 torpedo ran deep, passing beneath Bismarck's keel. 1 ran shallow, breaking the surface, losing speed, exploding prematurely. 5 torpedoes, 1 hit, no strategic effect. Godfrey's group attacked from the starboard. Bismarck's gunners had found the range now. A 4-inch shell exploded 15 feet from Lieutenant Owen Gick's Swordfish. Shrapnel punctured the fabric, severed the radio aerial, wounded the observer in the shoulder. Gick held course, released at 700 yards. Miss? The pattern repeated. Torpedoes striking armoured belt. Torpedoes missing due to evasive turns. Torpedoes running incorrectly. By 21:55, 13 Swordfish had attacked. 2 hits, both against armoured sections. Bismarck maintained 30 knots, course 130 degrees, heading for Brest. 2 Swordfish remained. Friend's aircraft and Lieutenant John Ginger Wilcox flying alongside. Friend circled to Bismarck's stern, staying low, using wave troughs for cover. The battleship's wake stretched ahead, turbulent water indicating high speed. Her rudder was visible beneath the surface, a dark shape oscillating slightly as the steering motors adjusted course. Friend had one advantage. He was approaching from the stern quarter, the angle where Bismarck's fire control was weakest. The battleship's main guns couldn't depress low enough to engage. Her secondary guns had limited traverse, but she was zigzagging, altering course every 30 seconds to spoil torpedo firing solutions. At 21:59, Friend began his final approach. Altitude, 60 feet, airspeed, 90 knots, deliberately slow to tighten the turn radius. Range, 1,200 yards. Bismarck's stern guns opened fire. 4-inch shells screamed past. One detonated 40 feet to starboard. The blast wave rocked the Swordfish. Friend corrected with rudder, held the nose steady. 1,000 yards. Bismarck turned 5 degrees to port. Friend compensated, adjusting his aim point. 800 yards. The battleship filled his windscreen. Grey steel, foam wake, gun flashes. 600 yards. Friend's hand moved to the torpedo release lever, and at that instant, Bismarck turned hard to starboard. Friend had 3 seconds to decide. If he released now, the torpedo would pass astern. Bismarck's turn rate was too high. If he held longer, he would fly directly into the battleship's secondary guns. 600 yards became 400 yards in 5 seconds at closing speed. He banked right, following Bismarck's turn, keeping the stern quarter in sight. The Swordfish's turn radius, tight, almost aerobatic for a biplane, allowed him to track the battleship's maneuver. A modern monoplane would have overshot, unable to match the turn rate at low speed. 400 yards, Bismarck steadied on her new course. Friend lined up the shot, 300 yards. He pressed the release. The Mark 12 torpedo dropped, hit the water 15 feet below, accelerated to 40 knots. Run time to target, 8 seconds. Friend pulled up, clearing Bismarck's superstructure by 50 feet, every gun on the starboard side firing at his aircraft. Tracer rounds, red, orange, white, laced the air. One shell fragment punched through the lower wing, another severed the radio aerial. Friend banked left, throttle full, climbing into cloud cover. Behind him the torpedo ran true. At 22:01, it struck Bismarck 200 feet from the stern, port side. The explosion was identical to the previous hits. 30-foot water column, white foam, black smoke. From Friend's perspective, vanishing into clouds, it looked like another armoured belt strike. Another failure, but this torpedo had hit the steering compartment. The warhead's 388 pounds of Torpex detonated against the hull, plating directly adjacent to the rudder actuators. The blast wave travelled through the steel, fracturing welds, collapsing bulkheads. The steering motors, 3 hydraulic units, shattered. The rudder, weighing 110 tons, jammed at 12 degrees port. Bismarck immediately began turning. Capitan Ernst Lindemann, commanding from the bridge, felt the ship heel slightly to starboard as she entered the turn. He assumed the helmsman had adjusted course to avoid another torpedo. Then the turn continued. 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. Lindemann spoke into the voice tube. Rudder amidships. The helmsman replied, Rudder is not responding, Herr Kapitän. Bismarck's circle diameter at 30 knots with a 12-degree rudder deflection. 2 nautical miles. She was describing a giant arc to port, unable to maintain course toward Brest. Lindemann ordered engineering to apply counter-thrust, reduce port screws, increase starboard screws. Bismarck straightened briefly, then resumed the turn. The differential engine power could slow the circle but not eliminate it. At 22:15, Lindemann sent a message to Gruppe West headquarters. Ship unmaneuverable, steering gear disabled, making for Brest at reduced speed. But Bismarck wasn't making for Brest anymore. She was making wide, uncontrolled circles in the North Atlantic, burning fuel, waiting for the home fleet to catch up. Friend landed on Ark Royal's deck at 22:34. He climbed out of the cockpit, pulled off his soaked gloves, said nothing. His observer reported to the air operations officer. We attacked from the stern, observed one explosion, uncertain if hit or near miss. The air operations officer nodded, marked Friend's aircraft as possible hit, and moved on to the next debriefing. No one knew yet that Friend's Torpedo, the last weapon released, from the worst attack angle, by an obsolete biplane in a gale, had crippled the most powerful battleship afloat. Write in the comments the exact moment you realized this wasn't about modern technology winning, but about obsolete persistence finding the one vulnerable point. I want to know when it hit you. The strategic consequences emerged over the following 4 hours. At 2300 hours, Bismarck's course 320 degrees northwest, back toward the home fleet. Lindemann ordered continuous adjustments to engine power, attempting to steer using propeller thrust alone. The ship straightened to 130 degrees for 12 minutes. Then the rudders fixed 12-degree deflection, reasserted control. Bismarck turned northwest again. At 2340, HMS Sheffield, a town-class cruiser shadowing Bismarck by radar, reported to Admiral Tovey, enemy altering course erratically, current heading 310 degrees, speed 28 knots, but variable. Tovey, 70 miles northeast on King George V, understood immediately. Bismarck was no longer under full control. She was burning fuel attempting to maintain course, and she was moving northwest, toward British guns, not away. At 00:15 on 27th May, Tovey issued orders. All units proceed at maximum speed to intercept. Bismarck steering impaired. Estimate contact at 0800. The mathematics shifted entirely. Before Friend's Torpedo, Bismarck was 18 hours from Luftwaffe cover, pulling away from British battleships. After the Torpedo, she was trapped in a circle, fuel depleting, unable to escape. But Bismarck was still the most heavily armed ship in the area. Her main guns remained operational. Her crew, 2,200 men, were experienced, disciplined, fighting for survival. If the home fleet closed during darkness, Bismarck could still inflict catastrophic damage. Tovey needed daylight. He needed visibility. He needed to engage at maximum range, where Bismarck's jammed rudder would prevent effective maneuvering. At 2 o'clock, Lindemann assembled his senior officers in Bismarck's command room. The conversation, reconstructed from survivor testimony, was clipped and factual. Can we repair the rudder? No, Herr Kapitän. The steering compartment is flooded. The motors are destroyed. Divers cannot reach the exterior rudder mechanism in these sea conditions. Can we steer using engine power alone? We can maintain approximate heading for short periods, but fuel consumption increases 40%. At current rate, we have fuel for 6 hours at combat speed. And the British position? King George V and Rodney are 70 miles northeast, closing at 20 knots. They will be in gunnery range by 8:30. Someone stated the obvious. Then we have changed from hunters to prey. Lindemann nodded. No dramatic speeches, no false hope, just acknowledgement of mathematics. At 8:43 on 27th May, HMS Rodney opened fire at 23,400 yards, 13 miles. Her 9 16-inch guns fired in salvo. Time to target, 58 seconds. Bismarck attempted to turn toward the British ships, bringing her full broadside to bear. The jammed rudder made the turn sluggish, uncoordinated. At 8:47, King George V engaged at 22,800 yards. Her 10 14-inch guns added to the barrage. Bismarck replied with her 8 15-inch guns. Her first salvo straddled Rodney. One shell landed 20 yards short, one 20 yards over. Perfect range, but the firing solution assumed Bismarck could maintain steady course. She couldn't. At 8:59, a 16-inch shell from Rodney struck Bismarck's forward superstructure. The explosion destroyed the forward fire control station, killed 12 men, knocked out the forward radar. Bismarck's rate of fire slowed. At 9:02, a 14-inch shell penetrated Bismarck's belt armor, detonated inside the forward engine room. Steam pressure dropped, speed reduced to 16 knots. At 9:13, another 16-inch hit destroyed Bismarck's B turret. 2 15-inch guns knocked out. The engagement became execution. Bismarck, unable to maneuver, absorbed salvo after salvo. By 10 o'clock, she had been hit by over 300 large-caliber shells. Her superstructure was shredded. Her decks were on fire. But she remained afloat. Her armored belt, designed to resist battleship guns, was doing exactly that. At 10:15, HMS Dorsetshire closed to 3,000 yards and fired 3 torpedoes. All 3 struck below the waterline. The explosions ruptured Bismarck's inner compartments, flooded the machinery spaces. At 10:36, Bismarck's crew opened the seacocks, scuttling the ship to prevent capture. At 10:40, she rolled to port and sank. Of 2,200 crew, 110 survived, picked up by British destroyers before U-boat warnings forced them to withdraw. If you can imagine what it meant to face a battleship in a fabric biplane, knowing a single torpedo might be decisive, this is a story worth passing on. The Fairey Swordfish remained in Royal Navy service until May 1945. It outlasted every modern aircraft type that was supposed to replace it. Consider the operational statistics. Between 1940 and 1945, Swordfish squadrons flew 1,841 operational sorties. They sank 14 U-boats, 6 destroyers, 1 battleship, Bismarck, crippled, and damaged dozens of other vessels. They laid mines in enemy harbours, attacked invasion barges during Operation Celian, provided convoy protection in the Atlantic and Arctic. Aircraft losses: 694 Swordfish destroyed in action. Crew casualties: 2,100, 2 killed or missing. Compare this to the Fairey Albacore, designed to replace the Swordfish. The Albacore was faster, 161 miles per hour maximum. It had an enclosed cockpit, better navigation equipment, more modern construction. First operational squadron, March 1940. Retired from service, November 1943. Operational lifespan, 3 years, 8 months. The Swordfish, 11 years in frontline service. Why? The answer lies in what the Admiralty initially considered defects. The Swordfish was too slow, so German fire control systems couldn't track it accurately. It was fabric covered, so it could absorb minor shrapnel damage without structural failure. It had an open cockpit, so pilots had direct sensory feedback in bad weather. It used 1930s technology, so any naval mechanic could repair it with basic tools. Every obsolete feature became an operational advantage. The Germans recognized this too late. After Bismarck, Kriegsmarine standing orders for capital ships included specific anti-swordfish protocols: maintain minimum speed of 15 knots during evasive maneuvers, deploy smoke generators to obscure visual torpedo aiming, assign dedicated flak crews to track slow-moving targets. But the protocols couldn't eliminate the fundamental problem. A battleship doing 30 knots generates enormous hydrodynamic forces around its hull and rudder. Any damage to the steering mechanism at high speed causes catastrophic control failure. And the Swordfish, flying too slow for modern fire control, was uniquely positioned to deliver a torpedo precisely where modern bombers couldn't. Contrary to popular belief, the Swordfish did not sink Bismarck. That credit belongs to King George V, Rodney, and Dorsetshire. But the Swordfish made it possible. Friend's torpedo removed Bismarck's ability to escape. Without that single hit, the battleship reaches Brest on 27th May, undergoes repairs, returns to operational status by July, continues threatening Atlantic convoys for another year. The strategic consequences extended beyond Bismarck herself. Hitler, shaken by the loss of Germany's most powerful surface unit, issued a directive on 28 May 1941. All major surface vessels will operate under direct Führer approval only. No capital ship will engage enemy forces without guaranteed air superiority. The Kriegsmarine surface fleet, Tirpitz, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, Admiral Scheer, Lützow, spent the rest of the war in Norwegian fjords, defending against invasions that never came, burning fuel, accomplishing nothing strategic. Germany's surface navy became a fleet in being, dangerous in theory, irrelevant in practice. And the weapon that achieved this, a fabric biplane from 1936, flown by men barely old enough to vote, attacking in a gale because no modern aircraft could. If one torpedo changing history sits heavier than you expected, leave a like, not as approval, but as a quiet acknowledgement of what those crews risked. The destruction of Bismarck fundamentally altered German naval strategy for the remainder of the war. On the 1st of June 1941, Gross Admiral Erich Raeder met with Hitler at the Berghof. The conversation, recorded in Wehrmacht conference minutes, was blunt. The loss of Bismarck demonstrates that surface units cannot operate in the Atlantic without air superiority. Hitler replied, "Then they will not operate in the Atlantic at all. Assign Tirpitz to Norway. She will threaten convoys from a defensive position." This single decision ended Germany's surface raiding strategy. Bismarck's sister ship, Tirpitz, identical displacement, identical armament, equally capable of disrupting convoys, spent 3 years anchored in Norwegian fjords. She sortied operationally 3 times. She sank 0 Allied merchant ships. She absorbed enormous resources, fuel, maintenance crews, air defense assets, while contributing nothing to the Battle of the Atlantic. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, reading Enigma decrypts, confirmed this shift by mid-June. Convoy routing calculations changed immediately. Previously, convoys detoured hundreds of miles north to avoid potential surface raider interception. After Bismarck, routes shortened by an average of 230 nautical miles. Transit time reduced by 2 days. Fuel consumption dropped by 12%. Multiply this across every convoy between June 1941 and May 1945. 1,368 convoys carrying 164 million tons of cargo. The cumulative savings, fuel, time, merchant ships freed for other duties, exceeded the industrial output of 3 Liberty ship construction programs, and the weapon that enabled this, Sub-Lieutenant Charles Friend's Mark 12 torpedo, launched from 300 yards in a force 6 gale. But friend didn't know any of this at the time. He landed on Ark Royal, debriefed, ate dinner, slept for 6 hours, flew another patrol. He survived the war, completing 163 operational sorties. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in July 1941. The citation read, "For courage and skill in action against enemy surface forces." No mention of Bismarck specifically, no acknowledgement that his torpedo changed Atlantic convoy strategy. Just 14 words summarizing 3 years of flying obsolete aircraft into situations where death was statistically probable. In 1976, Friend was interviewed for an Imperial War Museum oral history project. The interviewer asked when he realized his torpedo had crippled Bismarck. Friend thought for a moment, then said, "When King George V reported engaging a target making circles northwest. We didn't get confirmation for 3 days, operational security. By then, we'd flown 8 more sorties. Bismarck was just another mission. You didn't dwell on it, you flew the next patrol." The interviewer pressed, "But you must have felt something when you learned you'd stopped the most dangerous battleship afloat." Friend's reply, "Relief, I suppose. Relief that the torpedo actually worked. We had doubts about the Mark 12s. Half of them ran deep or broke surface. When I released, I wasn't thinking about stopping a battleship. I was thinking, please run straight. Please don't circle left. Please hit something important." He paused, then added, "The Swordfish didn't win because it was better. It won because it was too obsolete to fail properly. Modern aircraft had too many systems that could malfunction. Ours was too simple to break. Press the like button if this history demanded something from you. Leave one word in the comments. What was the Swordfish? And subscribe, because the moment we reduce Friend's 3-second decision at 300 yards to a footnote, we've lost the only battle that still matters.